What else do you say about the birth of Christ? You know, we all carry beliefs in our head that we know are just know by instinct that they are true, thoughts that we think that are just obvious to everybody, and we know that that it, especially we can see this in kids as well. They have these ideas that in their head, and I love having the children here in the church. By the way, the noise is just wonderful to me. But it's always funny when you're talking to kids and you're listening to them, and they come to these conclusions and thoughts and beliefs, and it sounds because they logically thought it through because they got information from us, and then they thought it through. And, just to give you a few examples, I feel like my thoughts are true. You know, I think probably 80% of them are true. I just don't know which 80% that is. That's my problem. But as kids, we get this information, and then we make these logical conclusions. And just an example, I talk about my dad, who, when he was little, he told us that, his parents told him, how did birds fly? And he said they fly with wings. And so he thought, if I build wings, I can fly. And so he thought that would be made perfect sense to him. So he made some wings, and he got up on the roof to fly. And if you knew my dad, he still did this even as an adult. He would, whenever he did something with intense physical work or mental work, he always stuck out his tongue. And he did that when he jumped off the roof with those wings and bit a hole right through his tongue. And as kids, we were fascinated that he had this scar on his tongue, that when he bit his hole through his tongue, trying to fly like a bird. We have a friend from Mexico named Alma. And they told her when she was little, like they told many of us, that if you eat something, you don't go in the water. You have to wait at least an hour before you can go into the water, or you might die. And so she had this in her mind that she had to wait at least 60 minutes. If not, as soon as she hit the water, she's gone. The heart would stop beating, and she was gone. In my own experience, I remember driving down the road with my grandfather up in Prosper, Texas, and 2-lane road. And he goes, I forgot to turn the brights off, and this car was coming quick to turn the brights off. And I said, well, why do you have to turn the brights off? And he goes, well, it blinds the guy coming towards you, the driver that's coming at you, it blinds them. And so I thought, that's how people became blind. And if I saw a blind person, I went, oh man, somebody shined their brights in that guy's eyes. It made perfect sense to me. But we also have these misconceptions about God that we've heard maybe from parents or some friends, Sunday school teachers, maybe the church, and that aren't quite good, quite right, and they can have really severe consequences about that, about how we think about God. And with imagine we have in them. And we have scholars, and we have preachers, and we have Bible students, who study, and they tell us and they try to describe to us what God is like, and they put it in bullet points or treatises or books, and they put in systems. In fact, it's called systematic theology, and they describe all of this. And it's okay, but it doesn't really tell me what God is like. It doesn't tell me who God is and what He's like. When I was in freshman English, it was a composition class, the teacher kept telling us, we'd turn in these papers and he'd say, don't tell me, show me. Don't tell me, show me. And that's exactly what the Gospels do. The first 4 books of the New Testament we call the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they could tell us these doctrinal bullet points about who God is like, but instead they show us. They show us a story. And they're different, and when you come to the birth stories, they're a little bit different. The one we heard tonight from Luke is a little bit different than the one we hear from Matthew. And they kind of fill in the gaps of each other's stories, and it's very good that they're different. Mark doesn't mention the birth story at all. But the one I was driven to most this year, even though we used Luke tonight, is the book of John. And John doesn't really, in the book of John, in the birth story of the book of John, there's no manger, there's no angels, there's no shepherds. You don't even see Mary and Joseph there. But all we have are these sort of mystical verses, these mystical passages that describe something. And what John is doing is he has given us a prologue about what he's about to show us. You know, a lot of times you go into a play and they'll give you a program and they want to set you into the time period and where you are, the geography and all this stuff. And, you know, if you remember, you know, the great special effects of Star Wars back in 1977, some of you don't, but I do. And the credits were rolling. It was just fascinating, you know, in the galaxy far, far away. And they set you in the place where they're going to tell the story. Well, that's what John is doing. John is setting the stage because he's going to tell us a story about a man, Jesus of Nazareth. And before he gets there, he wants to orient us to where this is. And so he gives us this prologue. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. And in the beginning, he was with God, and all things came into being through him. Without him, not one thing came into being. So what has come into being in him was life, and that life was the light for all people. The light shines in darkness, and the darkness cannot overpower it. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's only Son, and it is full of grace and truth. So he is setting the stage, and he's getting ready to tell us this story about Jesus of Nazareth, implying that this Jesus of Nazareth is the Word that he's talking about in chapter 1. And there's three main truths here in this little prologue that he gives us to set us up for the story. He says, first of all, he himself is the creator. He is with God. He was God. He was the beginning. Nothing was made without him. So he has this dynamic Word that created all things, that gave birth to every single thing. It gives birth to the creation. He explains why there is something instead of nothing. And that something is because of this dynamic Word. And he gave birth to the world we live in, to the people we live in, that's full of complexity, full of fertility and beauty and action and rest and variety. He's the birth of all of that came from this Word, this dynamic Word. And this dynamic Word also even called out a people to set in motion his plan to rescue us from ourselves. And this dynamic Word also is full of wisdom. This Word that has been forever in unity with the Father and the Holy Spirit now brings words of wisdom of how to live in this world. And what is God going to tell us? And what is God going to show us? And what did God do? So we have this dynamic Word of creation, this dynamic Word of wisdom, and this dynamic Word of calling people out. Then he goes on to say this Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It became one of us. He became one of us, and his glory filled the earth. And when we think of God, and we have some of those conceptions of God, many of us think of God as this distant, the man upstairs, you know, way off somewhere. That he's full of loud voices and thunder and lightning and volcanoes and earthquakes and all this kind of thing. And John's saying, no, this is God here, this Word. And he is full of his glory. And what does his glory look like? Grace and truth. That's not what I had God in mind, in my imagination. He is a God of grace and truth. And he became one of us. That's why we have the prophets read on Christmas Eve, because the prophets prophesied it, predicted it. Jeremiah hoped for it. Zephaniah longed for it. They all longed for this, for God to rescue us. And this is how he does it. And he shows us what God looks like in the flesh. This holy God now has a holy face. And John is going to tell us this story through his weakness, through his fragile body, through his emotions, that he also had to go through the process of learning. And God looks like this man who heals people. He accepts people who have been ostracized and getting ready to be stoned because they have sinned. He forgives. He calls people out. He offers water, living water, so that we would never thirst again. This is the story of what God looks like. So instead of listening to a bunch of bullet points, God says, no, I'm going to come and dwell with you. Eugene Peterson describes it this way: God decided to move into our neighborhood. And I always like that. That it comes in and moves with us, and this is the story. This is what God looks like. Not a systematic theology that maybe helps us understand a few things. I think it causes more arguments than anything else. But this is what he looks like. So he is the creator, the dynamic word of the creator. It calls us out, who called him out and named his name, I am, in the Exodus, who became flesh and lived among us. But he also is the light, the life that is the light for all people. And darkness will never overpower it. He is also the light. When John says this, he's telling us that Emmanuel has come before us. And he says the darkness will not overcome it. And what I love about this is that he is promising good news. Emmanuel, God with us, that's what the word means. Emmanuel, God with us, always brings good news, but he doesn't minimize the pain either. He doesn't ignore the darkness. He doesn't minimize the loneliness or the suffering or the depression. He doesn't minimize that. He recognizes it. But he comes as light. And light cannot overcome it. Even the tiniest bit. In a little bit, we're going to shut the doors, turn out all the lights. And if you've ever been in this room before, when you do that, it gets pitch black in here. But these candles, these little candles, will overcome that darkness. Darkness can never do anything to light. It can't. Just the teeniest candle scatters the darkness because it can't do anything. And so the light shines, and darkness will never overcome it. And so he says the life is the light for all people. And darkness will not overcome it. The world will not overcome it. The life is the light to all people, and you can't overcome it. Your depression can't overcome it. Your despair can't overcome it. Your shame can't overcome it. All that darkness cannot overcome the light. The light comes through. That's what Emmanuel means, that he brings the light. And in a little bit, we're going to be doing that symbolically here tonight. We will have the lights out, and that light will begin to spread throughout our congregation, and the darkness cannot overcome it. Darkness thinks it's very clever that it can do that. And sometimes it feels like it, I know. We have had some dark months, Sue and I, these last 5 or 6 months. And the only thing we hold on to is that light. And sometimes that light gets pretty dim, it feels like. But it's a small candle. But it's never overcome. It's always, always there. And so he brings the good news, but he doesn't minimize the pain and the shame. But just know that the light always will scatter the darkness. And this brings us back to the concept of God, what we were talking about at the very beginning. That God became a human being among the poor, in a stable, with animals. And what that tells me is that it is a good thing to be a human being, because God became a human being. And it is a good thing to, even in the most humble and simple circumstances, that the flesh is a good thing, that the world is a good thing. And Jesus came to love it and to love us. Jesus has given God a face. And so John has given us this prologue to say this is the story. And he's given us a face to look at and a flesh to hold and to touch and to understand what this is like. And he's basically given us someone to love. And we can describe God as a consciousness. We can describe God as this almighty power. We can describe God as this pulsating energy in the universe. And all those things are fine, but you can't love those things. You can't love something that's abstract. But you can love a person. You can fall in love with Jesus. This is what God looks like. This is who he is. We have a law, we have the tablets, but tablets don't soften hearts. People soften hearts. And the face of Jesus softens a heart. And we can't love a tablet, but we can love a Jesus. We can love a person. And that's what the story is all about. That this big picture that John paints at the very beginning about the Word and his creation, and he brings the light into the darkness, and he's come among us, then he's going to tell us this is what Jesus looks like. And the littlest bit of light will scatter the darkness. And so we're going to do that this evening. And the way we will do it, the instructions that just briefly, is I'm going to ask Sydney and Kaylee and Ronnie to come up, and we'll take the candle from the Christ candle, which is the white candle in the center, as a symbol of the light that Christ brings to the world. And then I will light their candle, and then they will share the light with you, and then if you will share the light with the people sitting next to you. And so we're going to be doing this symbolically, how the light spreads throughout the world, while at the same time we're going to sing the story. So I'm going to ask Kaylee and Ronnie and Sydney if y'all will come up, and also the worship team.